From the Ash Rises a Phoenix, Chapter 14, written by Kangarooney. Aaron wandered along the endless sand. He couldn't tell how long he'd walked along the hills. When he looked behind him, there were never any footprints. He could easily have been wandering in circles, as everything looked the same. Even the stars overhead stayed in their limbo. Despite the lack of progress, Aaron felt neutral towards it all. There was no anxiety or hurt in this place. If he thought very hard on it, he could vaguely remember what those feelings were like. He knew that they plagued him in another life, but here he could simply exist without worry. At some point, his vision faded until everything was an abyss of night. Below his feet, the sand still sunk and crumbled, draining his energy. Aaron, Aaron, Aaron. A voice tugged at his memory. Mikasa? At the thought of her name, she appeared before him, the only light in the void. Aaron, she begged. Wind tore at her clothes. Sand beat against her face and skin, tearing the flesh away, turning her raw and red. Aaron stared, unable to move as the sand destroyed her. Her voice stayed, haunting in the winds, as they wrapped around him, tugging and pulling. Aaron, Aaron, Aaron. Aaron! He whirled to see her on her knees, on the floor of his home. Beside her, Mama rested an arm on her shoulder. Mikasa was crying, a bruise forming on her cheek. Mama looked up, her face a blur, features indecipherable. She spoke with Mikasa's voice. Why would you hit your sister? Before he could defend himself, their skin melted from their bones. Gravestones littered everywhere. Armin Artlert, directly in his path. Below, an inscription read, "Betrayed by his family, death by broken heart." Aaron's hand shook as he placed a cornflower at the headstone. His hand was small, chubby. He'd picked the flowers to bring home to Mama. But somehow Armin was dead, and he'd only brought a few flowers to beg forgiveness. How could you? Mikasa was resting against the stone. She was old, hair graying and cut short. We were supposed to grow old together, and you let him die. She touched her chest, red spreading from her heart and soaking her clothes. Mikasa. He planted his hands against the wound, trying to stem the flow. Who are you helping? She spoke from behind him, voice monotonous. Aaron looked down and held only sand. He spun to face her. Instead, the whole world spun, and dizziness forced a feeling of nausea. He groaned and batted at the hand on his forehead. They were forcing poison into his throat, a bitter flavor burning his tongue. He choked and felt his stomach heaving. Acid burned his throat and lips, and he burned as his stomach struggled to force the poison out. No, Aaron. Mikasa's voice was soft as she urged him to swallow the poison. Drink it. You need... His ears clogged with howling winds. Aaron, Aaron, Aaron. Then silence. Aaron was exhausted, and yet he walked on. His muscles twinged as he climbed another dune of sand, eyes fixed on the stars above and glittering sand below. He needed to find her. Find her, he walked on. Aaron's our best bet, Armin assured the trio, nodding at Aaron. Your growth spurt will make them think you're older. But Aaron didn't want to leave them. He didn't want to be alone among those terrible people who refused to look in the sewers and see the people behind the dirt. You'll do it, won't you, Aaron? Mikasa and Armin stared, hopeful. Their eyes were shriveled, skin paper thin. They were starving before his eyes. They'd never make it in the core. Somehow, he was still growing while they were disintegrating. Do it, Aaron, she whispered, a hand on his neck. He spit at the dirt as his face was shoved further into the ground, the mocking laughter of Griever echoing in his mind. You're pathetic, he crowed, placing more weight on Aaron's back, grinding his heel in. Aaron couldn't move. His mouth opened and closed, dutifully eating the dirt as Griever told him. You'll do it, won't you, Aaron? Armin smiled, begging. Aaron nodded and smiled. He took his bowl of food that they split evenly. His spoon was filled with dirt and rocks. Dutiful, he swallowed the soil while Armin and Mikasa enjoyed a feast. Of course. He rose from lying prone in the sand and resumed his trek. The sand trickled down his front. Instead of spitting out the sand in his mouth, he swallowed, letting it scratch his throat, ruining his voice. He didn't need to speak. Follow orders, Aaron. Armin told him to be a good soldier. Aaron could be a good soldier. Aaron, please wake up, Armin. Aaron couldn't wake up. He was already awake. How could he do as he was told when he was already doing it? He felt a firm hand on his shoulder. His body shook. He turned, but no one stood there. He looked at his shoulder, the grip tight. No one stood there. Fingers intermittently squeezed his bones and muscles. They quivered from strain. He placed his own hand over the space. A skeleton gripped him. Kneeling at Armin's grave, with Mikasa dead on his side, he was being pulled into the ground. Soil entered his ears, eyes, and mouth. He choked. Shit, he needs water. I'm trying. Water? The void of sand rose high and whipped around him, choking him, suffocating him. Water would turn this world into mud, and then he would drown. No water. A hand squeezed in his chest, and he couldn't breathe. He clutched at his chest and ached. Can you hear me, Aaron? Find me, she whispered. He blinked. The void stretched on. He climbed another dune, emotionless. The sand stretched on as far as the sky reached. Aaron walked. Aaron walked. Aaron walked. Aaron walked. Aaron. Where are you going? Aaron, no! He left them at the gate and turned back to Trost, back to the giant boulder that crushed an entire block. At the very least, he could close that hole. Then, maybe they wouldn't kill so many from the walls. Sina was too small for everyone. He felt his muscles splitting and reforming from the strain. The time passed. Aaron walked. He dropped the boulder and turned to Armin and Mikasa. Pieces of their bodies littered the ground. Armin's hand dropped from the mouth of a grinning titan. It turned its head to him, masticating the remains of a human, formerly a friend. Aaron couldn't remember. Aaron walked. He opened his eyes to see a dark and starless sky above. Below, he gripped at the sandy ground. Everything was the same. The sky had no stars. A snore to his right made him turn to greet the next vision. Blond and breathing, Armin's lips were split, his skin pink from the sun. He looked okay. He looked alive. Aaron closed his eyes and returned to that empty need to find her, the end to this void, to walk. Aaron? Armin rubbed his arm. Aaron shifted from the touch. You're waking up, right? Aaron opened his eyes and met Armin's shining blue. Aaron! Mikasa, Aaron's awake! He lurched forward. Aaron recoiled, closing his eyes again. What, Aaron? He fell back into the quiet shadows of gray darkness and let his legs walk him further. She was around somewhere. Instead of the pervasive silence from before, Armin and Mikasa's voices created a steady mumble of background noise. At times, Aaron let himself focus on the words, to figure out what they would hate him for. Everything deserved. Is the water helping? Only a little. The sun needs to rise again. He walked on. Fingers traced his chest. They left ticklish lines behind that stayed with him, even as he searched the sands. He felt his lips grow wet and water trickle down his throat, quenching the unending thirst. The fatigue that was holding him back began to ebb. His heart beat slower, his breath evened out. The fog in his brain lifted a little, enough for him to wonder why he walked. Find me, she beckoned, urging him on. Aaron. He lifted his eyes and saw her in the distance, hand reaching to him while her body remained turned away. Come. Aaron kept his eyes open, wide, fixed on her. He began to run. She was there. He could almost reach her. His eyes itched, watered. He stumbled. Aaron gasped and choked on the water being poured into his mouth. Easy, Aaron. A hand cradled his neck and pulled the water away. You're awake. He coughed hard until his body stopped shaking and his eyes stopped watering. Everything hurt. He focused on his breathing. His dreams were fading as he breathed. He couldn't quite remember it all, but he knew they'd been horrifying. Here, Mikasa brought a rag to his lips. Have some more water. Her fingers brushed his cheeks in a soft caress. Eren keyed into the disquiet in her voice. He focused on her eyes and saw that she appeared conflicted. He turned to look at Armin and realized that he too appeared exhausted and haunted. Something happened when Eren was unconscious. Again. What happened? He croaked, voice catching on the words. Just drink, Mikasa urged. When you're better, we can talk. With exhaustion tugging at his mind and creeping into his eyes, Eren fell asleep before he could ask them why they looked so worried. Their mumbled voices cradled him into a soft and peaceful sleep. When he woke with the rising sun, Eren felt refreshed and new. The sun was warm on his skin and bright in his eyes. As he opened his eyes, Eren had one thought in his mind. I'm going to name my horse. If she was alive, then she'd made it through too many days to keep being called Horse. He knew her personality by now. She deserved a name. He sat upright, smile wide with the thought. Maybe he could call her Sunshine. The sun revitalized him, and knowing his horse was okay would keep his spirits high. And she was friendly. Her personality was eager to listen to his commands, even when put in such a challenging environment. He'd thought a few times that she might have received training for military work and failed out or retired. It happens sometimes. Not every horse could handle the desensitization training or refuse to follow their assigned trainer's instructions. Eren hadn't been involved in the dismissal of failed training because his mount at the time excelled. With the newly named Sunshine on his mind and the warmth of sunlight on his face, Eren took a moment too long to realize both Armin and Mikasa were also awake and staring at him with those same dismayed faces from the night before. Eren. Mikasa's voice quivered. I've been treating you since I found you by the lake. What? He let the energy and excitement leave his body, slumping back to the ground, focused entirely on his two friends and their somber expressions. What's going on? We've had some time to observe how Mikasa's treatments failed to help. Then we had to think about a different solution, and Armin swallowed. You're different. We saw you change into a Titan in Trost, Mikasa stated when Armin stopped speaking. We watched you block the hole in the gate of Trost, and you managed to stay strong even when we failed to share the rations fully. Here she looked away, face paling. Both turned ashen as they acknowledged their treatment of him over the previous days. By all rights, you should have fainted before either of us. Eren flicked his eyes between his guilty friends. He'd already accepted he deserved it, and besides, it all worked out. When he said as much, they both made wounded sounds. Armin whined, and Mikasa coughed, muffling her mouth. We saw you survive wounds that should have killed you, and this time, you steamed when I gave you water. Oh, right, that. He'd forgotten they didn't know about the steaming wounds. He realized that Mikasa and Armin were beginning to catch on to the phenomena he'd noticed days ago. I don't know what prompted these abilities, but Eren... Armin gritted his teeth and looked Eren in the eyes. You're not human. Okay. Not that you're not Eren anymore. Mikasa looked up, too, eyes wide. You got us here, and you act the same. It's just right now, you look human, but your body acts like it's a Titan's. It's like you're straddling two different species. And she bit her lip, worrying at a bruise she'd likely caused herself. I don't know how to treat a Titan. I only know how to treat a human. Dr. Yeager didn't teach me anything about Titans. Eren blinked once, twice. Slowly, he felt the weight of their realization settle upon him. After their confession, the clearing seemed to hold its breath. What exactly did they expect him to say? Eren doesn't know how he came to be this way. Vaguely, he could remember that he saved Jean, that he was swallowed whole by the Titan in Jean's stead. He remembers, like a dream, that he carried a boulder to block the walls, and that's a new memory he hadn't had before. And then, now, he remembers leaving Sunshine with his friends and forcing his transformation. He remembers the throb of agony. If he poked at that memory, then Aaron could feel the malicious pain rip through his mind. But he doesn't poke at it and lets it sit there, hidden behind the cloak of static. All Aaron knows is that he's had longer to accept his state of being than his friends. He knows that he went through the horror that Aaron was different and still the same, and now he must be there for them as they slowly work through the idea that Aaron is something else. The problem is that Aaron hadn't quite come to terms with his new identity, too busy struggling to stay alive that he kept the thoughts at bay. He'd accepted it as a fact while steadfastly ignoring the truth. It was all as if a veil had been lifted, revealing a nightmarish landscape. His denial, hidden behind that fake acceptance, surged to the forefront of his thoughts. I am the same. The sickening dread of unwanted change settled into his stomach like a rock. He felt vulnerable, unhinged, damaged. He watched the denial crumble, watched as Armin and Mikasa saw at the exact moment when his eyes said, "Oh, I'm not human." "You're still Aaron," Mikasa made a pathetic attempt to hide it all again. Yes, he was still Aaron, but Aaron still wasn't just a human trying to live in a world of human cruelty. This awareness grew clearer as the trio moved through the motions of settling into the area. Aaron wasn't hungry anymore. Instead, he'd lie in the sunlight and feel full of sunbathing while Armin and Mikasa focused on food. It helped for their rationing. They no longer had to ration water, with easy access to the lake, and yet Aaron wasn't particularly thirsty. In fact, he only drank when he scraped his skin and steam rose from the wound. It seemed that he needed water to heal and nothing else. He wondered if his last transformation had solidified the Titan in his body. If he hadn't transformed again, would he have maintained his hunger and thirst? Would Aaron be as terrified of open water? That was an interesting, if not terrifying, experience. Armin, to be playful, dunked Aaron below the water while he was washing up. Even though he'd been in waist-deep water and only had to stand up to escape, Aaron's body locked up. His mind exploded with a flurry of terror. I'm going to die. Get out, get out, get out, get out, get out, get out, get out. He'd ultimately passed out, limbs locked in rigor, and, according to Mikasa, she'd had to drag him from the water to massage his muscles for hours until he finally relaxed. At that point, the sun had set, and he didn't wake until dawn the following day. So, Aaron wasn't human anymore.